Coming up on the 5th episode of Shutter Nonsense, Jeffrey and I discuss the progression of nature photographers over time as we explore the common shift from photographing grand vistas to smaller, more intimate scenes. We debate the reasons for this change while also touching on the importance of photographing what you're most passionate about and not just chasing what others are doing. Before we get into the discussion, I'd also like to express our gratitude for our early Patreon supporters. Dario, Barbara, Benjamin, and James, we truly appreciate you. Whether you're ready to support Shutter Nonsense with a monthly pledge or not, be sure to head to our Patreon to participate in episode chats and share your feedback. And now, let's jump on into the episode. Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of Shutter Nonsense. I think that's a pretty exciting milestone we've hit here, Jeffrey.
Oh, for sure. It's awesome that we've already gone this far, and episode 5 does seem like a milestone.
And it only took me, 4 tries to actually record that intro properly, so I'm becoming a pro.
We've still got room to grow. We're always learning something.
Definitely got room to grow.
I think I'm on my 4th different camera recording this. So
yeah, between your laptop camera, your DJI Pocket 3, your Z5?
Z30, yeah, and now my phone.
Your phone. I could say something about Nikon, but we already had that conversation before we started recording. Yes. So the audience can imagine what that was about as a Canon shooter myself. So, hey, let's just jump into it per the usual. I know I've been neck deep and then some just in preparing for the launch of the podcast, which I know timeline-wise, this is totally off kilter in terms of the timeline we're talking about here and the reality.
It seems weird, right?
Right.
Here we are, episode 5, and it's like, but really, in reality, we're in the middle of all that background work to get it launched. Right.
So we're about 10 days from our official launch on Tuesday, June 10th. And it feels like we've got like 24 hours left with as much as we've been running around trying to figure out final edits and music and audio levels. And you were working on Podbean yesterday. So yeah,
getting some of that set up back there.
Lots going on. So that's been the bulk of my work since we last spoke. I did get all of my pricing and everything updated on my website. That was a good 8 hours of work for all.
You said that was quite the task, right? I forget how many lines did you need to import?
13,000 something rows, which is not as bad as it sounds, because with Wix, the platform I use for the website, you can just export your entire existing store catalog and then make your changes and re-upload it. So really, I've got to split it into about 6 files, and I just update the top row and then copy paste into the rest. But man, it's still tedious, and the nerves of making a mistake and totally screwing up your catalog. I always create a master backup just in case. So that's done. I've got no more canvas on the site. I've added metal end to go along the acrylic and the artist series. So that's a big project off my list. Other than that, I'm trying to think if I don't think I've really done anything else. And again, kind of timing the point at which we're recording this episode today, I got to get my Natural Landscape Awards submissions in, because of course, just like every other year I've entered the competition, I have to do it on the last day or second last day. So I haven't even started looking at my possible entries. Are you entering that one?
So I paid for their early entry fee, but I am not sure I'm going to be able to pull together images for it. So I'm trying to weigh the balance of time. Where should my time go? And I may not make it in this year, but I'm happy to support the contest because I do think it's one of the better ones out there. But yeah I'm not 100% sure I'm going to get something in. Part
of me was kind of feeling the same way, would it really, I think I did, is it 12 entries for 60 something bucks?
Yep. So, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Sunk cost fallacy of is taking the time to figure out what I'm going to pick and enter worth making myself maybe more stressed on preparing for the podcast, but I think we'll be okay. I think we're in a good spot right now in terms of podcast prep. YouTube channel's done, Patreon's done. I set up some community chats on the Patreon yesterday, so that once we're live and hopefully getting some participation there, we'll be good for just general conversation, general feedback, in addition to the episode post themselves. So I think we're good there. And kudos to, we're not even live yet officially, and we've already got a few paying members and some free members on there, which just blows my mind. As I jokingly said to you yesterday, if the podcast ends up with more paying members before it's even live compared to what I've got on my photography Patreon, I'm going to be a little hurt, man.
Right? Yeah, so. It's a little weird working on 2 things, right? You got our normal individual photography channels and creative content that we put out as individuals, and then sort of watching how the collaboration goes, like you said, the Patreon uptake, just a little general buzz. It's just a real interesting dynamic. It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think I've been I don't know if I'm surprised, but I've been very pleased with the response we've had so far as we start teasing it and, sharing the graphics that Heather, my fiance, came up with for the for the theme and the branding and everything. So I think the response overall has been really positive so far. Granted, I only know of one person that's listened to an episode. We shared it out with a few other of our peers to give it an early listen to and hopefully get some testimonials. But so far from Matt Payne, we've gotten the thumbs up. So although he did say
he the one that listened to it?
Yeah, he listened to it this morning. He did say his lawyer is going to be reaching out to us, though, about my usage of shifting gears in episode 1.
I was going to say, when I was spot checking audio levels yesterday, as we were working through, that was one of the pieces I heard was the whole shifting gears part, and I just had to laugh about that. So,
I mean, technically, I gave him credit, so I'm no lawyer, but to me, that's fair use. So we're gonna go with that
for sure.
So, anyways, the podcast has pretty much been like 99% of everything I've been working on. I can't think of anything else. I'm still waiting on the boxes for my collector's box set, so I thought I'd have them by now, but still waiting on those. They're still in production. Not quite sure why they're taking a little bit longer, but anxious to get those, and then getting ready for my June 1st email. And I think, unfortunately, I don't think I'll have pre-orders open on the box set just yet, since I don't have the boxes in hand, and June 1st is in 2 days, so...
Yeah, it's
something like that.
I think,
whatever. That's is what it is. Yeah. Other than that, so I'd say let's just kind of start. I'm not going to say shifting gears. Let's pivot into the heart of today's episode, which was kind of we've touched on it a little bit. At least I know I have in at least one of the prior episodes about that shift a lot of photographers go through from starting out and then getting a little bit further into their photography journey. Nature photographers specifically, going from photographing almost exclusively the big grand vista scenes and then shifting over time into the smaller and smaller scenes. And again, we've talked about like my shift into finding my love of tree photography and that. I think just kind of kicking it off, I was refreshing myself on a lot of your work, which again, I think you do yourself a disservice in terms of the quality of your work, man. I was looking at your gallery page you got on your website, and you've got some beautiful images on there. But
I appreciate that.
The one thing that stood out to me is you've got some small scene stuff on there, and you've got some more traditional grand vista, big scene. But I feel like you kind of fall in between, where you're like medium scene.
Yeah, for sure. I feel that, and I feel like a lot of it is because I feel like I'm still in my path to the small scenes. I feel like in my progression as a nature photographer, I've started moving past the grand scenes all the time towards those smaller scenes, but I'm still finding my way to that. And I don't think it's always easy, at least for me, to see them. I feel like I'm still one of those photographers that walks by amazing scenes, those amazing small scenes all the time. But I definitely feel like it's the natural progression of a nature photographer to go from those large grand scenes that for some reason, when you come either to landscape photography, that's just where you start, right? Like it's not uncommon. That's where you go. But I think over time I've come to see and appreciate those small scenes more, but in my path, I am still trying to more easily recognize those and create those images well. And I think that's probably why that's where I am in my journey. I'm sort of in this middle of I'm not full grand scene, but I don't have these super small. So that's why I think at the moment I'm falling right into that middle zone of where my work is at.
Yeah. Yeah. And just listening to you talk and thinking through my own work, like, I don't know that I can legitimately say I'm primarily small scenes these days, because I'm not like a Sarah Marino where I'm taking a lot of really, really almost macro level shots of, truly, truly small, little minuscule details in landscape. I'm still shooting for the most part, like I'm including an entire tree or most of the tree. So it's not like it's on a macro level of photography from my standpoint. I think it's right, quote unquote smaller field of view compared to like a lot of what I saw on your website. But I guess it would be a little disingenuous to compare myself to somebody like Sarah. Now, of course, I'm drawing a blank on who the heck else does small scene photography like her, but her stands out because it's so great. Maybe Ann Belmont would be another one. Again, of course, my mind goes, who are other photographers? Right. But anyways, there's varying degrees of it, of course. And frankly, when I've tried to see and photograph stuff like Sarah Marino does, I really, really struggle with that stuff. And for me personally, like I love looking at it, her work and others that do that type of work. It's beautiful, and it blows my mind how they can see that way, as well as edit in such a manner that doesn't feel heavy-handed. But oftentimes I think there is a fair amount of editing that goes into some of those. Not everybody, but whereas when I've tried it, it feels very clumsy in terms of the composition as well as the editing. I really, really struggle with it. And I think I'm at a point now where I'm like, I think that's okay. Like I think it's kind of like street photography. I enjoy looking at great street photography. I have zero desire to do it myself. Partly because I'm such an introvert. I would be just terrified of quote unquote putting myself out there like that. Right. Yeah, exactly. Having that one person come after me because I took their photo. Yep. But also as we've talked before, like photography for me is my form of mindfulness and escape. I don't feel like I could get that in a cityscape environment. So why would I pursue that? Maybe I would end up enjoying it, but right now, at least it's nothing I have any desire to do. And that's kind of where I've landed on that small scene photography. I'm happy with, and I get a lot of joy and pleasure out of that kind of small plus, however you want to frame it, type of photography that I'm honed in on lately. But I'm curious, you say you feel like you're on your journey from the bigger, grander photography. Now you're kind of like this middle area on your way to smaller scene. Do you feel compelled to move in that path, or I guess what's driving that shift from grand to small?
I think a lot of it comes down to, and the way I think of it is when you're first starting out, just the grand scene it's big, it's what catches your attention. But as you're out there longer and photographing more, my belief is you start to become more in tune with nature. So when you're first headed out, it's this big scene, it's the big vistas, it's the whole waterfall scene and the whole bit. But I feel like as you're out there, you get more in tune with nature, and that's when you start to notice these smaller things, whether they be the mid-sized scene, which I'm sort of gravitating into now, or the smaller scenes that others see. And I feel like that's part of the evolution. Like right now, I've gone from, I notice those mid-sized scenes better, and I think at some point I will see the small scenes more. And I don't think it's a forced thing, but I understand where you're coming from. There's some people that can do small scenes really good, right? And it's like, I have hundreds of small scene photos in my Lightroom catalog that are just, what is this? Like, you can tell I haven't pieced it together, right? So I'm not there. I enjoy it and I appreciate it. I'm probably more in the I can appreciate it phase more than execute on it phase. But essentially, long way of saying, I think the reason this evolution happens is because I'm more in tune with nature, so I can now see these things more. And I feel like the longer I'm out there, I will start to see these smaller scenes even more as I go. But it's a challenge, I think, shifting your creative vision from big to small.
Right, but not shifting gears. Never.
Not ever shifting gears. Shifting creative vision. We'll trademark that one. And
yeah, I think it's interesting. There's been on the landscape photographer Discord that we're in, like, there's been debates about this quote unquote trend, and I say quote unquote or air quotes, whatever, around the word trend, because I think there's a pretty broad consensus that it has been a recent trend. But I'm kind of wondering too, like, that group of photographers on there were all relatively close-ish in age and where we're at in our photography progression and everything. So I'm wondering if it's less a trend and more just we're all seeing that natural progression, our contemporary peer group, as opposed to the previous generation of photographers, or, however you want to frame it. Are we all just kind of like in that same path and journey and kind of in that same point? And a morbid way of putting it, I guess, would be Heather and I, a couple, 2 years ago, just a little over 2 years ago, we lost our dog, Lucy. For me, that was the first pet I lost that was my pet as an adult. And suddenly it was like all of my friends on Facebook, it was the same thing. Like, it just felt like every week there was another friend posting about losing a pet. And I had that realization, like, well, it's not because like there's some weird, like evil in the universe, we're going to take everybody's pets. It's just we're all in that same part of our life progression, and that we're all about the same age. We all got our first pets around the same age. And unfortunately now we're at that point where we're losing them. It's a really morbid analogy, but
right.
I think it's similar, just in a less depressing manner, potentially similar in regards to why do we feel like there's this trend? Because there's also plenty of photographers that haven't really made that shift. And like, I know Nick Page has been outspoken about, like, he's got zero interest in smaller scene photography. He loves the grand landscapes and grand seascapes and stuff like that. And I think that's important too, is each of us being able to recognize what do we really enjoy, and, you know, where do we want to go, if we want to go anywhere beyond where we're at right now. And like I said, I think that's where I'm at a pretty good comfort level in terms of, I truly appreciate the truly small scene photographers out there, but I don't think it's anything at this point that I see myself pursuing. Maybe, you know, I'm not saying I'd never take a shot, like opportunistic wise. You know, if I find something and it works, but I can't picture myself just seeking out that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think to that point, it's important to go with your passion, right? To me, it's almost like it's a tool in the toolbox as to, like, you know, the grand scenes is one thing. I know how to photograph those. I'm getting better at those medium-sized scenes. And then if I can learn to photograph those small scenes, it's an option when I'm somewhere to photograph or something like that. But to your point about the passion, like, waterfalls is probably one of the most cliche things to photograph as a nature photographer, right? And I make zero apologies for how many times I enjoy going to a waterfall to photograph it, because to me, that I love waterfalls and the experience. So definitely be true to yourself. For me, the small scenes is an evolution of just another tool, another way to be creative. And as the mind opens up to do it, I don't see myself moving into, people are going to look at my Instagram feed or my website gallery and go, wow, Jeffrey's a small scenes photographer. He's made it. As much as hopefully at some point people would be like, you can photograph an interesting scene. Maybe it was a perfect opportunity that opened up, and I'm still not a natural at finding them. But yeah, I think it's important. Be true to yourself, what you like to photograph. If you love grand scenes and that's your jam, then, you know, embrace it and lean into it. But I do enjoy dabbling, and because I just feel like it pays off overall to my creative eye, even when I'm at the grand landscape or anywhere, just to be more in tune with nature. I think it works out positively.
Yeah. And I think your points about becoming more in tune with nature, to me, that's probably the biggest piece that's driven my shift is, and we talked about it with our clients on the Smoky Mountains workshop, of, you know, the natural inclination of anybody, whether you're a tourist with just your phone or, you know, an aspiring photographer, is you show up at a scene and the big obvious thing is what catches your eye. So that's what you're going to photograph. But as you become more in tune with your surroundings and learning to look and see with that kind of more creative / photographer vision, I think you just naturally begin to pick out those smaller details that the average person is going to walk right by and never see. And that's one thing I have to find a balance for when I'm out somewhere, especially somewhere new, is I'm looking, you know, I've referred to it as my 500 millimeter vision. I'm looking like off in the distance and, you know, is there a craggy tree on that cliffside over there, or, you know, whatever. I'm looking for those small scenes further away. And sometimes I know I'm walking by things that are closer to me. So I have to consciously, like, hey, don't focus so far out that you're missing the experience of being in the beautiful location that you're in. And B, don't get so locked into that 500 millimeter vision that I'm walking right by something that's, you know, maybe 24 millimeter opportunity. And I'm definitely better about that, but I do still fall into that trap a little bit where I almost overlook the more obvious stuff for the benefit of the less obvious stuff, which sounds counterintuitive, but, you know, rolling up to a location like, oh yeah, that view's amazing. Now what can I find besides that? And again, I think we touched on it. It was either in the kind of Q&A, getting to know us episode, or one of the others, but over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been working to step back to photographing some of the wider scenes again, as opposed to just simply, here's a tree or, you know, an interesting branch or rocks and water or, you know, what have you, which makes my photography sound really boring. It's not that boring if you haven't seen it, I swear. But trying to, again, show off the place versus just the place's soul, as we've talked before.
Right.
You know, helping the viewer that hasn't been there get a better sense of what it's like to be in that location and experience it, and see it from I guess like 30,000 feet down to 20 feet, and getting the full take of what the full envelopment, or how do I phrase this? What it's like to be fully enveloped in that environment and learning to appreciate it, kind of stepping through it that way.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good way. It can be a good way to build a project or a collection of images too, right? You got the small pieces, parts, and then you got the slightly larger views to give you that environmental view of it and tie it like all together into something with context and pieces and parts.
Yeah, when I'm sharing the work, or when I'm putting it up on my website, I try to, if I have a collection that I'm releasing that's got a pretty good blend of wider and smaller scene photography, I try to pop in, I try to have some relevance in terms of when I'm sharing the wider scene and amongst the smaller scenes, like, oh, hey, by the way, this is where I was. You've seen all the little bits and details of the place it's sold, but now here's the broader view of it. But also like throwing it in just kind of like almost a jarring juxtaposition, not worrying about, does all this flow naturally from small scene to small scene, but like, hey, here's a really tight shot of this amazing tree structure or whatever, and then boom, here's this wide mountain vista view or what have you, just to kind of keep the viewer surprised and kind of guessing as to maybe what's coming next in the collection. But tied to that too, I'm curious, in your own experience and observations, I know I usually get a pretty different reaction on like social media of the broad views versus those smaller, more intimate scenes.
For sure.
What do you see with that?
Yeah. So if you take the social media, and it's a hard life, I think, as a small scenes photographer, right? At least I think it is, because at least I know when I post work, if I post a traditional grand vista or a sunrise, sunset, you get all sorts of people that love it, appreciate it. And I've got some photos from Dream Lake when it was frozen, when I was there in January, that are very small, abstract, which I really like. I enjoy them, and I think they do resonate well with people that appreciate them. But they do not pull in the likes or the comments that some of those grand scenes were, which, I guess it makes sense. It's that level of appreciation. I think it's the viewers matures, I guess, it's maybe not for the layperson on the internet, but yeah, for sure. I think that traditional grand scene, big, bold, compared to those subtle small scenes, definitely get different reactions on social media from that standpoint.
Yeah. And for the most part, I would agree. I do feel like, and I've noticed this recently with my own work I've been sharing, to me, it seems to be more driven about bold colors of late, as opposed to scope of scene. Like starting out, it was very much like grand vistas would rule the day, or, God forbid I shared a black and white photo, especially. But of late, and maybe it's a shift in the algorithm, or again, maybe it's just the viewer's eye shifting with time, the viewers advancing kind of that same progression / journey that the photographers are. But I've noticed that it's my images that maybe they're a very small scene, but they've got really bold pop of color. And that's always been, of course, it's eye-catching. It gets somebody to stop scrolling. But I've really seen a pronounced difference there. And actually some of my bigger scenes that I would have expected, not that I care too much, but that I would have expected to do better, haven't done phenomenally well like they have in the past. So I'm curious, is that an algorithm shift again that we're being swept up in? Or is it, again, kind of that viewer progression? Or is it just everybody's so exhausted by social media that it takes that big, bold pop of something to really get them to kind of pause for a second, to at least double tap? Right. As opposed to just continue to scroll on. Yeah.
That's an interesting observation. I'm going to have to pay closer attention to that a small scene with bold color can still do well. That's interesting. And I can see that because I'm thinking about my own social media consumption as I scroll through and look at various scenes. And I can definitely, feels like whether it be a grand scene with bold or a small scene, that might be sort of what triggers me. So that's I'm going to have to pay more attention to that, because I think that could be true.
Yeah, I relate it to kind of it used to be, you had to have a burner sky, man. The sky is fire or lit or, 100 or whatever the Instagram trope was back in the day. but it was still like you had that bold color because of the sunrise or the sunset colors. And it's almost like it's just shifted to now it's just bold color. Like what can we not, I'm not saying I would do this, but like, what can we do to grab that attention of somebody scrolling? Cause I think so many people, and I certainly can speak for myself in that I am feeling pretty burned out on social media.
Oh, for sure.
Even on Instagram, you're getting into a lot of the political stuff and that. And like, I get it. It's important to have those conversations, but also, man, I just want a reprieve. And so I find myself going on social media and I am almost doing that mindless scroll through the people I follow, their post, and it's taking something truly extraordinary to get me to like stop. Because otherwise I'm almost like, I don't want to look too close because that suggested post is going to pop up that's distracting me, or I don't know. It's just, I've noticed a different tendency of my own in terms of how I'm approaching it. And like, I'm seeing a lot of amazing work, but it's got to be something really, truly like extraordinary for it to really grab me. And maybe that's again, because we're all, if my theory is even remotely correct, that we're all kind of at the same point in our journey in terms of our contemporaries. Maybe there's a little bit of sameness at play in that there's so many woodland photographers and small scene photographers that now you almost have to have, whereas before it used to be everybody was sharing the grand vistas and you had to have the amazing sunrise or sunset to get noticed. Now it's smaller scenes that are proliferated through our feeds, but you need that bold pop of color in those to grab attention and have it stand out. I don't know. I could be entirely talking out of my rear end, but
I think there's some of that to it. And then as consumers, just like as photographers, we get more in tune with nature and pieces and parts. As consumers of photography, as we consume, like, I don't know about you, but when I first started scrolling through Instagram years and years ago, it's like, I didn't understand necessarily what made a good picture. Like, oh, that's heavily edited. That just and it gives you that hit of boldness. But I feel like as we consume more photography, our taste probably also, like, we've seen more. I've seen that done. Or, for me, when we do the workshops, we go to some iconic locations. It's like, I've probably seen some of these photos hundreds of times, and with a good chunk of them pretty well done too. So, I think we probably, as consumers of photography, we become more discerning with what we think is good, because we were probably writing off a fair amount as, that's okay, but I know how you did it, or I've been there. Okay, it wasn't, I've seen that before, which also plays into it, which ties into where we are in that river of our progression. We probably have a lot of the same peers, a lot of the same friends online, a lot of the same groups, all within a cluster of 3 to 5 years of probably either age or experience or just general skill level. So we shift. What we would have impressed us 10 years ago is completely different than what impresses us today, and probably will be completely different than what impresses us in another 3-5 years, and so on. So there's probably a lot of elements at play. I think it's an interesting observation.
Yeah. And I think also you mentioned the icons and rolling up to those locations. I know a lot of photographers, again, seemingly turn their noses up at photographing the icons or the wide views. And on one hand, like, I get it if you personally don't want to do it. I have no problem going up to an overlook and appreciating it for what it is and wanting to get my photo of it. Yeah, maybe it's not the best photo of it, but it's my photo of it. That's where I think, especially your hobbyist and amateur photographers, that's their viewpoint on it too. Like, I don't care if it's crowded. I've always seen these amazing photos. I want to have my photo of it, and that's, I think, perfectly acceptable. But we've seen plenty of debate in that regard too. Like, oh, why are you just doing that? You're just postage stamp collecting, or putting your tripod in the holes of the person that came before you. And it's like, but still there is something to be said for, well, I mean, what it was the argument, like, the icons are icon for a reason. So
for sure,
yes, I don't like dealing with the crowds and, all that stuff, but still, like, if I've got the opportunity to go to an icon and experience it for myself, like, why wouldn't I do that? And if I'm there, like, of course I'm going to take the photo of it. So I think, again, I feel like I'm seeing more acceptance of both approaches. I don't feel like I feel like there used to be quite a bit of vitriol against the icons and the wider photos. And even I used to say, like, well, I don't want to take a photo where anybody else could roll up, stand next to me with their cell phone and almost replicate the photo. Why would I do that?
Right.
But now again, going back to what I've said in a previous episode is like, but I do feel I got too far away from showing the places I was visiting versus just showing their souls. And like, right. If I take a photo or exclusively photos of small scenes, I guess on one hand, it's a plus that, hey, those could be taken anywhere. They could be taken 10 minutes from home as opposed to having to go travel somewhere. But on the negative side, I'm now creating a collection of work that, again, doesn't tell the full story of what I've seen and witnessed, experienced, and felt in the broader sense of that environment.
Right. Yeah.
So shifting back to the smaller scene photography, I think one thing too that comes with the natural progression of one's skills and one's creative vision and eye for the natural world is recognizing that a small scene doesn't necessarily have to have dramatic light on it to make a dramatic or an impactful photo. And again, going back to the workshop and you know, especially when we're at the overlooks and maybe you're waiting for the light or whatever. And of course, the attendees, a lot of them were so locked in on what the sky was doing. And it's like, well, don't forget that, yeah, it's a hillside of, you know, green spring foliage in front of us, but look at all the different textures and there's different shades of green that are creating contrast. So, you know, I think early on in one's journey, the inclination is to think about contrast very one-dimensionally. It's all about the light. And light can certainly be important, but you can also make compelling photos without the light and having that contrast, again, in the sense of color contrast, texture contrast, shape contrast, you know, the contrast of intersecting lines between, you know, within the landscape or whatever. And again, I think that comes with experience, but it's teaching oneself to step back from that. Okay, there's the obvious thing. So now I'm just going to see what the sky does. And if the sky doesn't do anything, I'm going to step away and walk home disappointed or bummed out. But yeah, you might have been missing all of the really great detail or little pockets of light on the landscape that wasn't as obvious. So again, I think it goes back to what you said early on, is gaining that appreciation for nature beyond just what's the obvious.
Yep. I mean, I mentioned the tools earlier, how I considered it, you know, I had different tools in my toolbox. And I think you're hitting right on that point right there, that by being able to photograph more than just grand scenes, if I don't get that amazing color in the sky or it's too overcast, I have other options to photograph at that spot, either directly from that overlook by using a telephoto lens, or maybe just walking 100 yards back and looking for something in the shade. My last West Virginia workshop last fall, we literally had 0 clouds for that whole workshop, none. And there are a couple, we do some sunrises, sunsets, and it was pretty much a running joke that, yeah, there's not a single cloud. And so we'd go to these overlooks. One of them is called Lindy Point Sunset Spot, and blue sky. You knew we weren't going to get anything. And that's where it's like, hey, I get it, but take a look around. Look at what the light's doing on the ridges. Look off to your left. Look off to your right. Look, once we get in the blue hour, what happens to the hillside. So I get it. We're not going to get that amazing sunset image with a colorful sky, but the light is still doing interesting things. It was fall, so we had, you know, fall colors down in the valley below. And it was very much a chance to hopefully help teach and show, don't get locked in. Use these other tools, and that's where those small scenes, I think, just become so great, is because it can turn a trip that would have been utterly devastating, disappointing, because I didn't get that amazing shot and I'm only here once, into I've walked away with some images I really like on those blue sky days, just because, okay, the sky's not going to do it. Let me look over this way, look over that way, get the telephoto out. And I walk away with some images that I really like, how the light plays across the ridges as the sun goes down and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's a great point that the small scenes it can be a tool and give you flexibility to have a potential to walk away from any outing with something that is interesting, even when the atmosphere and environment don't necessarily cooperate.
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, my own progression of, it gets very easy to not only get frustrated when you don't have those epic conditions, the amazing light, the clouds in the sky, you know, storm clouds rolling in, whatever, but also I think I don't want to come across as I'm putting down those that do enjoy primarily the grand landscapes or chasing conditions. Well, that's part of it too, is like we've talked, I consider myself a reactive photographer. I go out and I just see what I see. Mm-hmm. in my viewpoint, to create something truly special in terms of a grander view, or again, looking at Nick Page, like he doesn't go out and photograph blue sky conditions,
right?
If ever,
right.
But
if he does, he's not posting them,
right? But he's putting in the work otherwise to chase the conditions, and I think that's partly what he likes is that chase and the planning that goes into it. Whereas I don't want to do planning. It's like the first episode of this podcast. Like, screw it. We'll just do it live. We'll figure it out.
Right.
I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours planning and tracking, weather beyond just like a quick check to see, okay, what's it doing? What might I expect? So on and so forth. But I think for me, it was not just the frustration of not getting the epic conditions and losing the excitement and the joy of photography because, again, our expectations aren't going to be met more often than not. But also, like, let's use my local park as an example. And you're, I think, in a pretty similar situation of, I've been to that park dozens and dozens of times at this point. It does not have a grand view within that park, really. I mean,
right.
The most I can get is shoot at like 24 mil and, if it's a foggy morning or something, and then, kind of get a meadow view or something. Like there's an overlook that looks out over the lake, which is really a reservoir, and it's surrounded by houses. So if I was just shooting those grander views, I would have tapped out on that park a decade ago.
Right.
As opposed to, how many times am I going to go up and take the same photo? Even if the conditions are different. To me, it's going to get very boring very quickly. And again, yes. I may be getting good conditions, but it's still kind of derivative at some point, as opposed to being able to go in the park and just wander and see what I can see. Like, it sounds maybe egotistical or not very humble, but like, I'm surprised by how many photos I've got from that local park that I am really, really happy with, that I feel are unique and creative. And almost every time I go there, I'm coming away with something I never noticed before. And of course, nature changes over time too. So there's that factor, but taking that reactive approach and working with those smaller scenes, your possibilities are so much greater than just going to a location and shooting the iconic shot or the overlook shot, the wide shot. And like, okay, well, I've done that like 3 different times now. What's the excitement of going back and doing that same thing again? As opposed to, I'm always excited to go in and see what might catch my eye today.
That makes total sense. And that's sort of how I treat my local metro parks. Very similar, not really overlooks per se. And if you photograph this, you can only photograph the same foggy meadow so many times as a wider scene. Now that fog could shift, and on those smaller scenes play out really well for it. And I probably visited my local metro park, who knows how many times, but it's because they stay interesting because I just take different trails. I walk them in a different direction. I take a different lens maybe, or anything like that. Rain, snow, fog in a different spot, that it just starts to add up with such a wide combination of potential images when you approach it that way, that it maintains interest much longer than if you just stuck a 24 millimeter on and, well, I hope it's foggy this morning and right. for the 10th time or something like that. So,
yeah, I think if you wanted to be primarily a grand scene photographer, a wide vista view photographer, you're putting yourself into a commitment of having to seek out opportunities in terms of probably traveling more, going further afield from home, and so on and so forth, because again, you're going to tap out, I think, pretty quickly. And I'm guessing that that's what drives this kind of natural progression we see with so many nature photographers, is if you're just photographing the same composition essentially over and over, why keep doing it? You're going to just burn yourself out on it, or it's going to feel performative or no longer inspire you, what have you.
Right. So let's say you're listening to this podcast and you're predominantly a grand scenes photographer, but you're like, I'm like what I'm hearing. I'm hearing it could give me more flexibility. How would you recommend someone try to shift their? I've already admitted I struggle with that shift, and I don't think it's an overnight shift per se. But do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to somebody to try to shift their way of thinking from a grand scene? Like, what could they practice? Is there some technique or some way to shift that creative vision that you might recommend to somebody trying to appreciate those scenes and be in tune with those scenes?
I feel like it's, at least for me, it's a difficult concept to teach, because for me, I feel like it came relatively through intuition. But I think also, like, if I were to give advice, and this was something that I did talk to at least one of the clients about in the Smokies workshop, like, part of it is just taking that time to be still and observe and be curious and inquisitive to, okay, again, here's the obvious. Here's the beautiful cascade with rhododendron that should have been blooming but weren't.
Well, they probably are now.
Yeah, they probably are
down
now.
And check.
I only said that about 100 times on that trip. But anyways, here's the obvious thing, whether it's a vista or obvious waterfall, but giving yourself the opportunity to reflect upon your surroundings. And starting out, you're going to have to do it consciously. Just like I was saying, like, if I'm looking for a small scene a la San Marino, I'm going to have to consciously look for that, as opposed to it just kind of jumping out at me more intuitively or naturally, what have you. So you've got to consciously sit there and say, okay, well, I'm at this waterfall view. Beautiful waterfall. I'm going to photograph it because it's an amazing scene. But what else can I find here? And again, it kind of goes back to working with that one client that was shooting with his 100 to 400 in Cades Cove, and him being so excited because he is able to be in that 300 to 400 millimeter range without even having to move around much. It's, there's a composition, there's a composition, there's a composition, because you're starting to see in that 200, 300 millimeter, 400 millimeter vision, field of vision, whatever you want to call it, just through the act of practicing it. And it might mean that you've just got to grab your camera out of the bag and, hey, I'm going to zoom into 300 mil and pan around and see if anything jumps out at me. I'm going to zoom into 400 and do the same. I don't think it's a passive skill set or creative progression. I think it's something you've got to be actively engaged in and seeking out those opportunities. And over time, you'll just start to recognize it. Again, I can roll up to a location and if anything, as I said, my pendulum has swung a little bit too far the other way to where I almost overlook the obvious, and it's, look at that tree way off in the distance there. I'm going to immediately photograph that. And that's fine, but it's, to me, I want that balance as well. Somebody else may not. That's just where I'm at currently in my journey. But I really think it's got to be something you're an active participant in, trying to develop that eye, trying to develop that skill in terms of seeing the world around you differently and asking that question of what else is there from this spot, or, well, okay, I don't necessarily say here, but let me go over to that little hill or ridge or, whatever, and see if there's anything there. And again, maybe you got to pull out the camera initially and pan around to see in that mode, but eventually over time, just like with anything, you'll get better and better at it, and you won't need that technical aid to learn to see that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think I liked how you said it was a conscious sort of approach, right? It doesn't necessarily magically just happen. It's got to be a conscious effort. I know one of the things I did early on, we all know I like to photograph Hocking Hills, which traditionally shoots better like a mid-range, like a 24 to 120 in Hocking Hills. We'll cover you for a good chunk of things, but I'll do what I call a one lens challenge. And when I was trying to learn the 100 to 400 millimeter length, because it didn't come natural to me, that focal length. That for a long time I had the lens and I don't even want to put it in a bag because it's heavy and I don't see much. But I would go to Hocking Hills with only the 100 to 400. I would leave all my other lenses at home and go down and go to familiar places I'd been to dozens of times. But because I only had the 100, 400, it's sort of what, like you said, sometimes you just have to pan that camera around with a lens on it, but it made me do that. It's like, okay, I'm here. I can only be in this 100 to 400 length. And I think it helped start to see those scenes a little smaller, or at least see things a little differently when you did that. So that's something I know I've done in the past to try to consciously make myself see that, is to limit the gear I had. So I had to look at things in a different way than I instead of seeing it 24-120 length like I was used to, I had to see it in a 100-400 length to get some ideas and figure out how to work with it. So.
Right. And we just, I don't know if you were involved in it, but there's a conversation on the Discord again about artificial limitations or artificial restrictions, placing those on yourself for the sake of developing or honing a skill. Mm-hmm. Now, if you give yourself the option to fall back on what's comfortable, then there's a greater chance you're going to fall back on what's comfortable. Whereas to your point, if all you took is the 100-400, well, if you want to get any photos, now you got to learn how to shoot and see with that 100-400. I think, in that vein too, again, thinking through my own progression, starting out, like, what did I start with? I basically started with a 24-70. And then I started using the 70-200 a little bit more. And I didn't go out and buy the 100-400 right off the bat. I didn't get that until 5 years in. And it was when I was at a point with the 70-200 that I was finding myself constantly wishing I had that added reach, because I was starting to see beyond the 200, but I couldn't reach beyond the 200. So I went out and got the 100-400 right before my trip to Yosemite in February of 2020. And it was just like this, angels singing moment when I'm in the park. And that was a trip where it was pretty much just blue skies. So it's not to say I didn't shoot with the 24-70 that I was carrying at the time, but my 100-400 did a lot of the heavy lifting, and definitely some of my favorite photos from that trip came with that lens. So it wasn't, I think it'd be difficult. I'd be curious if any of our listeners can chime in, if anybody really ever goes out and buys their first camera with a 100-400 or now Canon's 100-500, I would be skeptical.
Yeah, I would highly doubt that. I know that just didn't seem like, when I hear landscape, at least back then when I heard landscape photography, if anything, my head was at 24-70 or something wider. That's where my head was at. It took a while to be like, oh, there is a real use application for me. 70-200 was events and portraits, right? But yeah, that's a great question. I would be curious if folks wanted to, what lenses did you start with, and was it like a 100-400 or 100-500 right out of the gate?
Yeah, and actually thinking back on it now, my first two lenses, I bought the Canon T5i with the kit 18-55 mil. So it's a crop sensor, so that's about 24-70. And I actually, maybe I just blew my own argument up. I also bought the 75-300, although I bought it more with the mindset of like birds, not landscape. I guess part of it was that 75-300 kit lens from Canon was so bad. It didn't have image stabilization. It was just, it was awful lens. Man, probably the worst lens I've ever used. So in terms of what I was using, it was that 18-55, aka 24-70. And then the very first lens I bought after that was Tokina 11-20 mil, I think.
Yep, it's always a Tokina lens.
Right, I went wider. And I got that partly for the astrophotography that I got into around 2016, 2017. But I wasn't seen in that telephoto range yet. The only times I can recall really using the 75-300, even when I started out, was again like, ooh, there's a bird on a branch somewhere. Or, I'm going to sit out back and photograph the birds on the bird feeder, what have you. So, and then I went, from there, I had the 11-20. Then I went way in. I got the Tamron 150-600. But again, that was primarily about the wildlife photography, which I soon found that I'm apparently a natural wildlife deterrent. So I gave that up pretty quickly, and I used that for some landscape stuff. But I mean, that thing was like carrying a bazooka around, so I didn't carry it a whole lot. But so I guess I'm a good counter argument to like, well, nobody's buying a long lens right off the bat, but I did, and I didn't use it, A, because the lens sucked, and B, because I didn't know how to use it fully, I guess. Like, even if it had been a good lens, I wouldn't have been using it the way I use my 100-500 today, I don't think. But anyways, I'd be curious if our listeners want to chime in on the Patreon chat. Did you go out and buy a 100-400 right away? If so, like, how was that experience? Was it, for you, easy to jump into it, or did you struggle to see that way and find things to photograph? Did you shift back and get a wider lens? I'd be curious to see if kind of what the majority is out there. I would suspect still that most people start off with the kind of that 24-70 quote unquote traditional range.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see. I'd like to hear I'd like to hear some folks. I would like to hear from some folks on that.
Only took you 3 tries to say it.
I know.
We'll edit those other ones out.
I should be warmed up.
The last piece I'll throw out there is, do you feel, well, I guess this is kind of a 2-pronged topic or question. Do you feel that smaller scenes help you tell more of a story, and or does it allow you to insert more of yourself into a photo?
For the tell the story part, I think the potential is there, but I'm probably, myself, I'm not executing well on telling a story with it. Just because in my head, to tell the story with it, I need a little bit of that bigger environmental scene and then piece together some interesting piece. So I end up with like a 5-6 set of something. So I think the potential's there. I'm not great at executing on that piece of it. As far as inserting more of myself into the scene, I think there is more potential there, because with the grand landscapes, like you said, so often it's an iconic scene that it's dialed in. It's like, okay, to get this picture, I go here, I stand here. And I even say that as someone who goes out and likes to try to think different. And I encourage thinking different, but there's a reason that the pictures end up with your tripod set up here with this and this part of the frame and this. So there, I feel like you still get some great images, but there's more of a formula to what you're supposed to do. Whereas the small scenes are, in my opinion, so much more your interpretation of, the colors, the textures, the lines, that I think there's more opportunity to come away with images where you've inserted your perspective, your view on it, and it's much less likely someone's going to come along and do exactly what you did. Right. So that's how I think. What about you? What's your thoughts on that?
No, I feel very much the same in terms of the small scenes and injecting pieces of myself into. Like you said, if I'm taking a photo that anybody can roll up next to me and basically take the same photo, then I'm not really putting a piece of myself into it. It's not telling a story of the place or a story of Michael.
Right.
I feel like the whole story piece is a bit of a, I'm going to say, trope. Like I kind of hate the whole, like, oh, well, what's the story of your photo? If it doesn't have a story, it's not, it's not a good photo. Like,
oh,
I'll bleep that out if I need
readers,
to.
you can Patreon community, you can
share your
take
thoughts.
issue with that. That's potentially a whole episode in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I know. And I think this conversation is kind of coming to a wind down state. But I to me, a smaller scene is easier though. If I want to tell a story, I feel like I'm more inclined to be able to do so through a smaller scene. But what I will say is, very rarely does the story form for me in the act of making the photo. It's when I'm back at the computer, and oftentimes it's not even until I'm done with the edit and now I've got to title the stupid thing, and I'm really mulling over like, what does this scene represent or make me think of? How in the world can I come up with creative title number 500 or whatever? That's a lot of times where my stories for a photo come from. It's not a in the moment realization. It's upon further reflection. Oh, well, this can tell the story of blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
An example of that would be my photo, Letting Go, that I took at my local park almost 3 years ago. Beautiful photo, fall colors. There's a tree with brilliant golds, and there's like a dead branch or tree arching over off to the left. And at the time I took the photo, like, to me, it was a pretty scene. Like, it caught my eye. I framed it up. I want to photograph that. I think it's a great subject. So I did. I didn't have any story in mind though, but as I was working on it, and then again, when it came time to title it, I came up with the title Letting Go, because it was just, let's see, that, at that time when I was working on editing and titling it was when Lucy, our dog, was going through kind of that decline period. So, loss and letting go was very much on my mind. We knew we were approaching at some point having to let her go. And then thinking beyond that to, I lost my father 8 years before that, and, thinking about my mom, who I've subsequently lost, but at the time knowing that act of letting go was going to be a persistent theme. We have other pets that are older, and, there's just, and it kind of has been this, like every 6 months, it's like letting go. And that all came to mind as I was trying to tell the story of the photo, but not through anything I experienced or felt in the field, but it was all in that reflecting upon it after the fact standpoint. So I think it's easier to tell a story with a smaller scene, whether it's when you're standing there making the photo or, like my case, when you're titling it or editing it, than a broader vista scene. Like, what story am I telling if I'm standing at an overlook of Bryce Canyon and it's a broad view looking out over the Hoodoo? It's an amazing scene. It's an amazing view. Right. But when I'm titling it, I can't really put much of a story to it unless I had something going through my mind at the time or whatever. So anyways, long-winded way, and I know I went on a little bit of a tangent in terms of that whole that story piece, but I've seen that argument that, like, oh, every good photo's got to have a story, and I really don't buy into that. Sometimes a pretty photo is a pretty photo is a pretty photo, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. So maybe that's a good part or a good point to wind this down before I get too much further up in my soapbox about something. We already had my angry episode last week with AI, so yes. Let's avoid that. But I do have one thing I want to talk to that I meant to shout out in the intro that I forgot. Last week, I think it was, I finally got my copy of Matt Oliver's book.
Oh, cool.
Back there, Forgotten Souls. Give me a moment, I'll grab it. Wonderful UK photographer, near and dear to my heart because he pretty much just photographs trees. Absolutely beautiful book if anybody's looking for a fantastic photography book.
Awesome. With
some phenomenal photography. Yeah, I've only chatted with Matt through Instagram, but seems like a really, really good guy. I'm definitely happy to support his work, and reasonably priced book too. So definitely recommend Forgotten Souls by Matt Oliver.
Awesome.
So shout out to Matt on that. And also, Jeffrey, I realized that in the introduction, I talked about me, and what I've been up to. But have you been up to anything besides working on your side of the podcast?
My side of the podcast did a YouTube video. You know, I got that put out about a camera bag. So I did that, recorded and edited, and then podcast stuff. So not a super busy week. So I wasn't going to jump in because it was just a lot of the normal behind the scenes of a landscape photographer that produces content. So. Yeah. And that might be the same thing for us next week, depending on how this final 10 days leading up to the podcast goes. But I think for sure. I feel like we're in a good place. And again, I know it's weird for anybody listening to this because you're like, but this is episode 5. But in our lives right now, a podcast? We're 10 days away from episode 1 even being going out. So it's a crazy timeline disparity here, but yeah, I think we're in a good spot. We're up on Podbean. Hopefully that'll flow through, and we'll get set up with Apple and Spotify and all that, and everything will just flow through from there. And hopefully this goes live and people like it. So trying to think if there's anything else to talk about. I might just cut out this end part and say, with all of that out of the way, until next time, take care, everybody. Bye, everybody.